Joining me now is Senator Mazie Hirono of Hawaii, a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee. And Senator, it seems to me that from the very beginning, Brett Kavanaugh's tenure on the court, his accession to the court, has been questionable because I don't think anyone who paid attention thought there was a thorough investigation of Christine Blasey Ford and other women's allegations. With this new information, plus all the other scandals, should there and will there be a specific investigation into misconduct, potential misconduct by Kavanaugh?
Well, with regard to Justice Kavanaugh, it was very contentious, as you know, and the FBI's so-called second investigation, we concluded, I certainly did, that it was totally inadequate because from what you're saying, they did not interview all of the witnesses, including, by the way, Dr. Ford. So going forward, my focus and that of the committee at this point is to require that the Supreme Court itself have some procedures for when there is misconduct within the court, and that's part of the bill that would require stronger recusal requirements for the justices, as well as requiring them to adopt a code of ethics. So there is a bill that would do those things, and that is the hearing that the Supreme Court Justice Roberts has declined to come and join us at. However, Joy, we are going to go forward because this is important. Disclosure is important, and making sure that the Supreme Court is held to the highest standards. They should at least have a code of ethics that all the other judicial the judges have. It's really totally unacceptable that the Supreme Court seems to think that they don't have to abide by these requirements.
But the question, I mean, the Senate Judiciary Committee has an independent authority to investigate. They are under the purview of the Judiciary Committee, and Justice Roberts raised separation of powers questions and said he wouldn't come in. However, we still don't know who paid off $700,000 in Brett Kavanaugh's sort of magically disappearing debts. We still don't know the full extent of the Crow relationship financially with Clarence Thomas. We still don't know the extent to which Clarence Thomas's wife has been involved in insurrection and other political endeavors. We still don't know about Justice Roberts' wife, who apparently took in $10 million in fees as a headhunter in connection in an elite law firm, according to whistleblower documents. And then there's also Gorsuch. They're selling and buying properties from people with business before the court. They are acting like a little tin pot elite that can do whatever they want. They have no ethical boundaries, and yet they're whining and complaining, including Alito, that no one trusts them and that no one likes them. Shouldn't the Senate Judiciary Committee investigate them specifically for their misconduct, not just to get a new ethics rules, but their misconduct?
Whether or not,
potential, I should say.
Whether or not we're going to go down that road as we are proceeding to require them to have a code of ethics, whether or not the committee wants to do the kinds of investigation, I frankly don't know, because what we want is for them to at least have a code of ethics so that these kinds of behaviors, these kinds of deals are at least disclosed to the American public. And I think what that leads to is a desire for court reform, and that we do not have a balanced court. We have a majority that is extremist. And my hope is that we will begin to really push for example, increasing the number of justices on the court and all the other things that I think will change the way this court operates.
I think a lot of people... I'm sorry, finish your sentence.
Yes, there are different ways that we can proceed. I've been wanting to get to court reform for quite a few years now. And I think all of this kind of drip, drip, drip that you're talking about means that I think there will be growing support for the kinds of changes that will reform the way this court operates. And that's where I'm going.
Thank you, Senator Mazie Hirono. Always appreciate you being here. Thank you. Joining me now, let's bring it. Thank you. Let's bring in Elie Mystal, justice correspondent for The Nation. I mean, I could do 7 more minutes of potential ethical scandals, Elie. I mean, the conduct by Clarence Thomas could be criminal. The conduct by Kavanaugh back during that time could have been criminal. The FBI did a pretend investigation of him. He's sitting on the court judging whether we can have the rights over our own bodies, and he might have misused the bodies of women. To me, they seem completely out of the bounds of ethics, and they don't care.
And Hirono just said something that I think is a problem with the Democratic Party's response to this entire ethical catastrophe, right? And she said it, right? She was like, we're hoping the Supreme Court adopts for itself a code of ethics. Why are we leaving it up to them? Like, what more does the Supreme Court have to do to prove that it is incapable of policing itself? At this point, we are in a world where the Supreme Court's like, oh, we can totally police. Look, we saw a mouse in our house and we caught it. No, you idiot. If you saw the mouse, that means you've got 10 in the walls and you need to burn it with fire, okay? Like, it is time to send in the cats. It is time to send in the owls. It is time to send in independent oversight over the Supreme Court that the Supreme Court does not have a choice with. And so the thing that I wanted Senator Hirono to say, that I want Senator Durbin to say, that I want anybody in Congress to say, is to use Congress's congressional authority over the power of the purse to bring these justices to heel. It is Congress that controls Supreme Court funding. Now, we have seen, because of some of the drip of scandals that you mentioned, Joy, we have seen that these 9 people are probably able to live without their government salaries, right? Yeah. Between their land deals and their book deals and their laundering money through their spouses, they probably don't need their government salaries, right? But I bet they like having a courthouse. I bet they like having clerks. I bet they like having free Westlaw access. I know they like having taxpayer-funded security details, right? And if Congress starts taking those away, if Congress puts the stick to these people and starts taking away some of their perks and some of their privileges, then I bet you the Supreme Court would see the virtue in submitting to independent ethics oversight. It is that or the highway. This ridiculousness of the Supreme Court to police itself has already been proven to be false and unable for these justices to do.
Well, the other branch of government that could step in is, of course, the executive branch, namely the Justice Department. I mean, the conduct by Clarence Thomas is potentially criminal. I've heard not a peep and not a whit of a chance that he might be investigated for that misconduct. It's starting to feel like these 9 people, and it's really 6 of them who've been doing just the strangest things, or at least 4 or 5 of them, are above the law. Because if the Justice Department won't do it, and the Congress won't do it, that means that they are above the law, right?
I do not know what Chris Wray has to not do to get fired, right? Like, I don't know what other level of incompetence we need to see from FBI Director Christopher Wray for him to lose his job. He is the one who botched, and I would argue covered up, the Brett Kavanaugh investigation. He is the one who had the opportunity to hear all of these senatorial complaints. He's the one who went with, like, oh, it was somebody else's exposed genitalia. It wasn't Brett Kavanaugh. He's the one who believed that. Why does he still have a job? Nobody can answer that question for me. So absolutely, the Justice Department, which Chris Wray works for, needs to get involved and at least figure out how they completely messed up an investigation into Brett Kavanaugh. They need to do something about investigating Clarence Thomas. They need to do something, and they won't. And the thing that really gets under, in case you haven't figured it out, the thing that really gets under my skin, Joy, is that they won't tell me why. They won't tell me why they won't do this. In 2018, speaking of Brett Kavanaugh, when the Democrats were running to blue wave the House, Nancy Pelosi promised me that there would be a real investigation into the Brett Kavanaugh allegations, and that never happened, and nobody told us why. So, like, just at some point, you have to, like, understand that these people, yes, they are operating above the law because nobody in law enforcement tries to stop them. We should at least try to stop them.